Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And with authoritarian regimes threatening freedom, prosperity, and democracy in the Western Hemisphere and around the world, this hearing couldn't be more timely, so I thank you and the ranking member for holding it. Across Latin America and the Caribbean, China is using everything from finance to fishing to technology, even vaccine access to influence a greater and greater share of its abilities within the hemisphere. In the face of these challenges, the United States can't stand idly by. We have to do more to compete in the region. And we have to stop taking our own hemisphere for granted. That's why last Congress I introduced the Advancing Competitiveness, Transparency, and Security in the Americas Act. It was the first ever legislation focused on strengthening U.S. competition in Latin America and the Caribbean. It expanded our financial tools and diplomatic presence. It countered corrosive economic practices. It worked to secure the region's physical and digital infrastructure, and it boosted support for civil society across the Americas. And I'm pleased to see many of its provisions were included in the U.S. Innovation and Competition Act, which we're on the verge of passing. There are important steps as we deal with authoritarian threats, but we can't stop there. And I have a real concern. I've heard some of the testimony or questions raised by some of my colleagues. I share in them. You know, China is aggressively all over the hemisphere. I can't tell you how many leaders in the hemisphere I've been talking to as they face the challenges of energy and are ill-equipped to deal with those challenges. We see the challenges we're having ourselves. I understand the President just announced 1 million barrels a day released from the SPRO, but they don't have a SPRO. And in countries like some of these countries, the Dominican Republic, the Caribbean, and others, that effect can create civil unrest. If the prices spike up, we're going to have a huge problem. We have a huge problem coming out of the pandemic with the reality that, IMF requirements, without being eased and extended over time, not relieved, not forgotten, but eased and extended over time, these countries are not going to be able to meet it. Look what we did to spend to try to meet the pandemic in our own country. They don't have that ability. So, and we see the consequences of this in civil unrest, as we saw in Colombia when it was pursuing an IMF-related element. It just seems to me that we do not have a strategic, comprehensive plan. And so when China goes and says to one of these countries, I won't mention them, but the president told me himself, we'll give you $400 million. When China says, we'll finance your energy costs, the reality is that we may not be able to go dollar for renminbi, but at the end of the day, we're going to have a much more robust response. And so, I think of the IDB, for example, as an entity that can help us meet that response. But for some reason, the administration seems to have a challenge working with the IDB, even though the IDB, from everything I've seen in their agenda so far, is doing everything the administration would want to see. And finally, kicked out China to a large degree. China was using the IDB as their sales agency in the hemisphere. Imagine that, mind-boggling. And our directors there basically allowed it to happen. Thankfully, there's new leadership there that is moving in a different direction. Leadership that includes Taiwan, which I'm sure China won't be happy about. So, Deputy Assistant Secretary Hannan, do you agree that the Inter-American Development Bank plays a critical role in sovereign lending? Wouldn't a capital increase expand that role?
I leave that to my colleagues at USTR to comment on that, but I do agree that we need to find additional financing mechanisms in Latin America to give our partners there more ability to partner with other outlets than just the PRC.
Well, unless I'm mistaken, your title says you are the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Diplomacy, for Policy, for Planning, and for coordination of the Western Hemisphere. Why can't you speak to that question?
We have a broad strategy to address China in the region that touches on all of the issues that you have raised, as well as the remainder of the senators the honored senators. I am reluctant to comment on another agency's goal, but I do think we need to see increased opportunities for U.S.-led finance, U.S.-led and other private sector to invest in the region.
Well, it's shocking to me that you can't comment on the Inter-American Development Bank as a tool that is very viable, because I don't know, the DFC has some tools, but it's limited depending upon the nature of the country's development or not, whether it can participate in it or not. So what are we going to use? Because if China's doing all of this and all of us see it up here, if we can see it, and it's not our job to be in the midst of this day in and day out, as it is your job, then something's wrong. There's a clear disconnect. Let me ask you, maybe that you can answer this one for me. The U.S. Coast Guard has called illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing, otherwise known as IUU fishing, the primary global maritime security threat. IUU fishing fuels drug trafficking, it perpetuates forced labor practices, it threatens biodiversity, sovereignty, economic livelihoods of affected countries. The People's Republic of China is the largest perpetrator of IUU fishing. An expansive report by the Associated Press last fall implicated China's distant water fleets in IUU fishing in Latin America and the Caribbean. Chinese flag vessels in the region increased at least 13-fold between 2009 and 2020, and the report documented them engaging in extensive illegal fishing off the coasts of Argentina, Chile, Ecuador, and Peru. What concrete steps is the State Department currently talking and planning to take in coordination with the interagency and alongside our diplomatic partners in the region to confront Chinese IUU fishing in Latin America and the Caribbean?
Thank you for the question, Senator. In addition to Southcom, Geoff South, and Coast Guard's effort to enable our partners to address IUU fishing, we are doing a lot to draw media attention to this pernicious problem, as coastal countries in Latin America, including Ecuador, Chile, and Argentina, all are experiencing unsustainable PRC fishing practices, as well as the distant water fleet off the coast of Argentina. We are pressuring the PRC to be transparent, to enforce their own zero-tolerance policy, and fulfill their state responsibilities. It is an environmental threat. It is a threat to food security. We worry about forced labor on the fishing vessels. And we also are looking forward to a new opportunity to partner to support the CMAR, which is the Eastern Tropical Pacific Marine Corridor that the countries of Ecuador, Costa Rica, Colombia, and Panama announced at the COP26 as an interesting regional initiative to help protect a more than 500,000 square kilometer region that's critical to fisheries as well as environmentally important.
Well, they seem to be able, Mr. Chairman, to do it with impunity. So something is not working in terms of our engagement in this regard in our own hemisphere. And for these countries, fishing is a critical element of both sustenance as well as national income. So I look forward to working to have a more aggressive response. And I'll save my question for digital authoritarianism for the record. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.